Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. We are having kind of a reunion show. I'm going to be on with my brother, the Hijacker. And for those that don't know, it was long ago and many years ago that the Hijacker invited me to come on to his show. And we shared a lot of time and space together doing many shows covering a lot of issues. And then I began my own show and began to broadcast here on Revolution Radio. But Hijacker, are you there, brother?
Yes, Zen. It's been a long time. How's my audio coming through?
Sounds good. And also for the listening audience, if you would, let us know whether you're hearing an echo or a reverb, or if the audio is clean and everything is good. I appreciate all of you. And tonight we're going to be speaking about lost, forgotten, and forbidden history, especially with regard to Tartaria and the Mudfloods and other cataclysmic events, lost technology, culture, civilizations. And I know that you've been studying and looking into this, Hijacker, for a while now, and as of that it's been an issue of keen interest to the listening community and especially to the YouTube audience, that a lot of people have begun to look into this particular topic. And it's an interesting and fascinating aspect of history, which has been completely disregarded, swept away, and hidden. So much so that most have never even heard about Tartaria, and most have no idea that it seems to have been, even most recently, one of the largest empires widespread in the world. And that even before the founding of America, that North America, Central, and even South America, portions of it were part of the Tartarian Empire. And so we get you to comment on that.
Yeah, Zen. So what we ought to call this, the grand, not the grand theory, the grand unified, that's it, the grand unified theory of history. And so I'm actually a bit of an expert on both the Tartarian Empire and what's going on with the Mudflood, an online expert, so to speak. I've just done a lot of research. I got a lot of notes. In fact, anybody out there, this is going to be like a fruit cake. It's going to be really thick with a lot of information because I really have gone through this. And what triggered this grand unified theories and was actually in your second book, The Great Contest 2, at the end of chapter 18, you went into basically how the serpent seed line, basically the Nephilim went on past the flood. And I'm looking at all this information, and it's actually very factual. There's like 8 or 9 different disciplines, architectural history, anthropology, what do you call, I can't say the words, and you're going to have to help me with a lot of this stuff because I'm just not as educated as you are. In other words, what do you call a person who makes maps? It's a cart something.
Cartographer.
Cartographer. Right. Yeah. So anyways, there's like 8 disciplines for, anyway, so at the end of your book, I thought, something's not right. There's something not right from what I can visually see, what we know, and what happens in Noah's flood. And so I got to looking around, and in different references in the Bible, it talks about the people under the earth, both in Job and also in Revelation and 1 or 2 other places that there's actual, it talks about like living people under the earth. And then we have all these stories about the Hopi, the Native Americans saying these ant-like people before this great flood or whatever took them into the earth. And so I'm starting to call on the question, did really 8 people produce all of the people now on the earth? And then especially when you take a look at two of the largest ethnic groups, and that is Africans, I'm talking about black Africans, and that group of people, and then also the Han Chinese, and how they're so different. We really, out of 8 people, in other words, produce those type of variables. And, then I'm looking at the Noah, and it was a worldwide flood, but there are all these stories about underground chasms and different places that people could have gone to survive it. Now, above the earth, it appears that nobody survived. But is there a hollow earth? We got stories about that. Of course, all this stuff's in the North Pole. We got stories of, people actually going to those 4 sort of island continents with the 4 rivers that actually go into, I got to help me out with that mountain. There's like a mountain in the middle of it, Zen. It's,
Mount Meru.
Yeah. Meru, is it?
Yeah, Meru.
Meru, right.
Yep.
And so that's when I started thinking, wait a minute, there's a thing here that we don't know, that's completely hidden from us. And so this grand unified theory then is this, that the Nephilim, they, and the giants, this particular giant race, when they heard, and even though they were in rebellion against God, both the fallen ones and the Nephilim, the giants, I believe that some of them, as soon as they started seeing Noah build this ark, and he's talking about there's a flood coming, and as you made mention that Noah didn't even come out of the mountains, he actually built the ark right there in the mountains because he knew the water was going to, yeah. And I'm thinking, you know what? The ones that weren't that smart, they laughed. Mm-hmm. But I got a feeling that the smart ones and the rulers, they saw that this was the word of God, and this guy was a prophet, this guy Noah, and that this thing was coming. And I think they actually then started to conspire, and they started to search the earth. How can we survive this? And I think they found places within the earth in which they weren't drowned. And then no sooner did the flood happened, then I think they took both themselves and their slaves. This grand theory of history is that mankind has been enslaved. So basically, in a nutshell, what I'm telling you, I believe now that there was a race of giants that had a worldwide empire, even at the days of Noah. They saw this flood coming. The smart ones went ahead and they figured out how to hide within the earth, different places. After the flood, they came up with their peoples, and they restarted this, and that we've basically been ruled all the way up until the biblical times when Joshua went, and in other words, the 31 giant and their kings of Joshua, the wars, the book of giants that you write about. I think that was just part in that particular area. I'm thinking then that the whole rest of the world already were having civilizations, and that the people that were under these, and when I'm talking giants, I'm talking 20, 25 footers. I'm not talking the 7 to 9 foot, red-headed giants, that were concentrated in North America. That was more or less a subspecies. What I'm saying is I think that these 20, 25, 30 footers could actually rule the earth all the way up until about 1750. And that was the last of their empire. And I think what happened since the time of Israel and then all the way up to the time of Christ, that they were gradually beat back as the small men, normal people, multiplied. And so as they beat them back and beat them out of Rome or whatever, they left these great architecture type of buildings all throughout the Middle East, Greece, Italy, through France. And then as the men and Christianity in particular expanded out, they were forced out of different pockets to where they were just these, and think about it this way. Think about like a couple of dozen of these tall, 20-foot Nephilim super intelligence race of giants that were there. They might have thousands and thousands of little small men under them in all these different places on the earth that they were their slaves, and that they actually were ruling all the way up until about 1750. But as Christianity spread out, then they were forced more and more to basically the outskirts. And I can prove pretty much all of this, and I'll just give you the list, and then I'll let you jump in here, Zen, if you want to, critique anything. So worldwide, we've got star forts and star cities. This is very common, literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these places all over the earth. And if you want to know what a star fort is like, think of like a snowflake. It's a very unusual fort. When you actually take a look at it and take a look at the ones that you can actually see that are still around, very tough to defeat. I mean, it's not like a four-walled city where you just gang one wall, and if you can get up over that wall. No, they had it where the walls were built where one wall could help defend the other in one point, and then they had moats, very complex. Anyways, these structures are all over the earth, even to this day. Then you've got the maps. If you actually take a look at the maps, and I'm talking maps all the way back into the 1200s, the early maps that we've got. This one guy, Barnabas Nege, who I don't know why he turned his back on his religion, although somebody did tell me on his faith, did tell me that because he said he used to be a Christian, but now he's not. But then one Christian told me, no, you don't understand. In that culture over there in Romania or whatever, when you grow up, that's what you're identified with. It's like somebody who grows up in a Catholic church. You ask them, what religion are you? What faith? Oh, I'm Catholic. Well, it's not the same as a Christian Catholic, somebody who's actually converted and has a relationship with Yeshua. So it's completely different, so I understand that. But anyways, Barnabas Nege, you can see he got a hold of literally 100 old maps. I'm talking all before like the 16th and 17th century. And he did this one video on was California an island. And so he goes through all these old maps, starting with the oldest. And what you immediately notice is that all around the ice ring, there's actually developments, and you can see where there's structures and all kinds of things all throughout Africa. There's civilizations, Sydney, Australia, even Japan. And so you take a look at all these maps and you start to realize, wow. And then he gets the map all the way up until that point. California was an island in all these different maps. Right. But 1744, everything changes. California becomes part of the United States. There's something that happened. But not only that, all the maps in 1744 worldwide seem to change. So it's the maps. Then the third thing, you got the actual architecture. What it is, these Greco-Roman type of grand structures that you see in Greece and in Italy, Rome. It's a type of buildings. Well, it turns out these buildings are all over. These Romanesque, Victorian type of towers and domes really huge concrete blocks. And then the other thing that goes along with all these different buildings, which are all over South America, you ought to see the one in Japan, Zen. You wouldn't believe it. It's like a Roman Greco temple. It's completely out of place in Japan of its architecture. This incredible building. I don't know if it's their parliament or whatever. Really old. But anyways, this type of architecture is all over. And then the other thing that goes along with this particular architecture are all these huge doors. I'm talking 25, 30-foot doors. So you got the architecture as well. Then the other thing, Zen, and you do a lot on this, we're finding these old bones, huge bones all over the earth. There's one guy that wrote a book, and for the first 120 pages, it's nothing but old newspaper articles in the United States where people find all of these huge skeleton-type remains. And you're talking 18-footers of giants they pulled out of the mines. So that's the fourth big thing, is that we got basically all of these bones that we find that the Smithsonian seems bound and determined to hide. Then if you actually take a look at murals, old paintings of like large groups of people, or drawings, and these are really old. In all these drawings, and there's literally hundreds of them now, you see all of these really tall, giant people, and then right beside them, some of them not even up to their knees, some of them only like not even up to their hips, are full-grown adults. And you can see that there's actually children beside them and dogs. So you can actually see that, look, these are really large people on all these murals and all these drawings. And so you got that whole discipline in which, if you go back, and you can see even some of the portraits. And then if we keep bringing it forward, if this theory is right, and these Nephilim giants, and I'm talking 20, 25 footers, ruled us, great groups of men, where they basically built the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They built all these places. They were their homes and their temples. And you got these buildings, and then something did happen, then that's not that long ago. And so now we got photography. And so now if you actually do the research and look at old photographs, and the first photograph was taken in 1825. So that would be about 75 years after what I think was this great mud flood. Now, some people want to say that there was another event, 1809 to 1806, and that's when the New Madrid quake happened. It rang bells in Charleston, South Carolina. The Mississippi went backwards, and that there was a great mud flood event then. I think it was a secondary event. So 1825, we got photographs. Well, if you look at these old photographs, you see the evidence of something tremendous happened. Not only do you see photographs, and you can see, in some of them, you can see really giant people within these photographs. And they're all over, these really old photographs. But then the other thing you see, Zen, and I know you've done research, so I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but there are pictures, early pictures, 1840, 1850, 1860. When you take a look at the early pictures of St. Petersburg and Moscow and even Paris, all different places all over, even New York, you see these grand, great cities. Dresden, take a look at Dresden. If you take a look at those photographs, no people, or very, very few. And all you see is what looks like they were, there's a mud floor to it. And you see this strange type of telephone pole with no wires, along with these grand, incredible buildings with spirals and strange things that are on top of the towers and the domes. almost like it's a complete technology, almost a wireless type of energy and technology that we know nothing about. And so you got photographic evidence. That's the other discipline. But you can even go further. You can go into video evidence. In other words, the first early pictures. And you see things that should not be. You see the 1893 World's Fair. Take a look at all those buildings, incredible structures with massive amounts of electricity and lights. You see back in the 1870s, supposedly even before electricity, we were supposed to get it. I think the first place that got electricity was Niagara Falls. You see in like Paris, France, you see these people getting on this walkway. I'm talking about there's nothing but horses and buggies around. But these people are getting on, there's actually two walkways that are actually moving like, what do you call the thing in the airport? Zen, like escalator, right, where it just pulls them. And they're going like, like over a mile. I mean, how does that work? And I mean, they're moving at like a 5-6 miles an hour clip, faster than you can walk. And they actually have another escalator that goes slower. You step onto that one, and then you step onto the other. So you got this old video, and then you've got even video. It's fairly modern, but some of it's really old, of these really giant people. There's one video out there, 200 giants in the earth, and you see like, this beautiful, she's gorgeous Asian woman, and you see she's holding her hands with her boyfriend, and he only comes up to her hips, and you see all kinds of video. So you got the video evidence, and then you got the other discipline, which is history. And I know you study history an awful lot, and there's something that we're not being told, because there used to be a nation called the Holy Roman Empire, and there was actually a world war before what we would call the First World War. And it was actually Napoleon Bonaparte, and that was right around the 1800s. Actually, it started in 1760. Where it was the Prussian War that won against, but there was nothing but war for year after year, including our Civil War, including our 1776 rebellion, and then the Napoleonic Wars right around 18, where Napoleon, he went all the way to St. Petersburg, and he found the place empty, and so there was something that happened that created an incredible. Something happened right around 1750, which caused the whole world to go at war. A lot of people got wiped out. And then shortly after that, at the turn of the century, we start to hear about orphan trains going out to the Midwest with just nothing but filled with thousands and thousands of orphans. And you hear these new type of orphanages that were founded. And believe it or not, they called them foundlings. They looked that up. Like, you found something, they call these people foundlings. And so, and they even had baby trains. There's even a memorial, I think it's in St. Louis, to the great baby train. So what's that about? So what I'm saying in this grand unified theory, and then I'll get you the comment, I got plenty of other notes, but what I'm saying is I think these Nephilim giants ruled in groups of maybe a couple of dozen, and beneath them were thousands and thousands of pretty much slaves, and that there was a great judgment that came. I think that they were ruling the earth, and as Christianity spread, they were being beat back, but they were still in charge, this great Tartarian Empire, and it's on the maps. If you look at all the maps, even all the way up into the 1700s, you'll see Grand Tartaria. They're the ones that actually built the Great Wall of China. You could see it goes, the Great Wall actually goes east to west, in northern China, and it actually gates open from the north, where that great Grand Tartarian Empire. You can see the Chinese Tartarian Empire, right around the time Genghis Khan. It looks like Genghis Khan was probably one of the generals of these giants who were actually ruling these different groups. Goes all the way down into India, and then you could see even Grand Tartaria up northern Africa. Goes all around where they had cities and noble cities and royal cities, and so something happened, and I think it was some type of judgment. And I'll just wrap this up with this, Zen. I think as men were spreading, I think these Tartarians, basically this evil race of giants, I think they figured out or used biological weapons, and I think that's where the Black Plague came from, where they just murdered. They says, you know what, these people are too many. They're overwhelming us. They're overwhelming our star forts, our kingdoms, and I think they spread this. And the Black Plague just didn't go for like 50 years or whatever. You can see evidence of Black Plagues, special outbreaks, even all the way up into Moscow. There was a Black Plague that hit in like 1780 or something. And then I think one, or maybe before that, 1600s. And I think when they did that, I think God pronounced a judgment on high. And I think he says, you know what? You all need to get back into your hole in the ground right there in the North Pole, the hollow earth. And I think he sent a mud flood. And there's evidence for the mud flood through these buildings and architecture all over the earth. And I think once that rain and that mud started coming, I think this race of giants, I think they just went, oh no, the old man's going to do it again. He's going to drown us. And I think they went ahead and I think they hauled ass back into the center of earth. But I think they left because they were breeding with people. I think they actually bred down these Illuminati bloodline families into smaller sizes. And we can see these people, this serpent seed line, all among us. They are our rulers. It's just not the Jews or the Jesuits. No. This particular genetic bloodline is throughout all the earth. It's in Asians, it's in blacks, it's in Caucasians. We can see it all over. And I think they left, as they pulled back, they left their family, basically, in charge. In fact, in some of these murals and portraits, you can actually see these really tall, giant, 20-foot type giants holding, reaching down and holding hands with looks like little bearded men, and it's almost like their family or something. It's not a child. It's a grown man. And so I think they pull back and they go, if we stay on the earth, all these little people, they're going to keep on doing what they've been doing. They're going to keep wiping us out, killing us, these rebellions. I think these Tartarians actually crossbred with the great ape. I think that's one of the ways they kept all these different kingdoms and places intact. They figured out how to breed with them. They create these Bigfoots, these monsters, and so they could keep people in all these different cities, because if you went out into the woods, the monsters will get you. I think they genetically messed with that. That's where the Bigfoot came from. But in the end, they had to pull back for whatever reason, and then they left in their wake the 13 Illuminati bloodlines. And so the history that we are getting, I don't think is the true history. Just like right now, they're censoring everybody, wiping out. They got book burnings. Google is scanning books, making it digital, and we actually hearing about semis of old books being burned up, to where they're just wiping us clean through the digital. And you can actually see it now, wiping out whole websites and YouTube accounts and all this different history. I think they did it back then. I think they rewrote everything, and the absence of written history actually proves that somehow they wrote. They were the victors, and they wrote the history, and we really don't have a good history until about. Really, our history actually starts as far as full books and everything. It starts right around 1750. And then one other thing, Zen, because I'm talking too much, you can see I'm too hyped up. The other thing is we got, and you can go online and you can see books that are 6 foot tall,
Right.
I'm talking about, and you're talking about, you can see this lady and this guy, he's like 5'9", and you can see the book is at least 6 inches bigger than him. You can see stacks of books, which are huge. You can see these huge swords. You can actually see guns. There's actually a portrait of what you think looks like these French soldiers all in a line. And then you're looking at it, and you're thinking, well, that's normal. And then your eyes drop down to this little guy who's a general standing next to these other taller generals, which are actually bigger than these other big guys. And you realize they got guns and bayonets, and you realize that these little guys are actually our size generals with pictures of incredibly long guns. So basically, Zen, your work is really what was the master key for me to come up with this grand unified theory of history that these Nephilim, they have been here all the way up until just shortly, and all the evidence, whether it's video, pictures, murals, architecture, bones, maps, star forts, flags. I didn't get to that. Flags and symbols, lack of history, just a lack of pictures. If you're going to build a building, and it's 1850, and you want to build, I'm going to build this grand, great building, this structure. Well, you're going to be a rich guy. You're going to take pictures of it. No pictures of all these really old stone block, Greco-Roman cathedral-type buildings being built. And even when you do see pictures of all these cities, number one, you don't see any smoke or fire coming, smoke coming out of the chimneys. You don't see any construction, no cranes. And then you got pictures like out in Oklahoma where you see this little house up on this thing there, and you see they've dug down like 150 feet in the mud, and they're actually digging out these old buildings like in St. Louis. And it's like, what? What is that? But anyway, Suzanne, I'm talking too much. So I know you've been studying. What's your comment on, well, what do you think? How close on the mark do you think that this is? Go ahead.
I like your presentation, and I agree with your assessment, and I absolutely do believe that they are connected in some way to the giants and to a higher technology that has been lost. And as you made mention, I do absolutely believe that the Most High brought judgment upon them and has been, as I cover in great detail in my work, that even the destruction of the First World Age and even Noah's flood was about wiping out the giants. And that it was not a judgment per se against humanity, even though we had fallen away, but it was more focused on decimating these giant bloodlines so that the descendants of Noah could survive in a world where they didn't have to worry about being eaten, or attacked and wiped out. And so, in similarity, I think that what we see as the Tartarian history and the missing aspects of that history has to do with also judgment that the Most High brought against them and their culture and civilization, going back 100, even thousands of years, even longer than that. I mean, there's been even the Tower of Babel, Nimrod, and all that. That's connected to the New World Order elites and that whole high technology and relationships with the angels and the giants. And so, yeah,
So
very interesting.
you think it's right? So you think it might be like a series of judgments with like the Noah's flood being like a grand judgment, but then as they start to do what they did before, and here's another theory, Zen, and I get it out of all. This kind of comes from just looking at, because you put up all these kinds of images on all your different videos that you do and the stuff that you do on YouTube and in your books. You have these particular type of grand structures, but these particular very unique architecture, like a Notre Dame, or like some of these Greco-Roman temples in Rome. In fact, they are all over. Take a look at the Kremlin. Take a look at some of these places all over, even in Sydney, Australia. Just absolutely incredible, beautiful structures. But I'm actually starting to think, Zen, that these fallen ones and their sons and daughters, the Nephilim, I think they have some kind of memory of actually what heaven looks like, because it is almost otherworldly. I think that the reason why they're so obsessed with pyramids and they're so obsessed with this type of Greco-Roman, Victorian type of architecture is, I think, actually in heaven, Zen, that's could be when Jesus talks about a mansion. I'm thinking he's not talking about like a 5,000 bedroom house on the cul-de-sac that we build. I'm thinking that his idea of mansions are these type of grand type of architects' buildings, and that maybe they remember, they have like a shadow memory, and they're actually trying to recreate, the grand glorious structures in heaven here on earth, which they seem to be. We don't seem to be able to duplicate them. Like they talked about Notre Dame. Oh, we're going to rebuild that.
Right.
Which, by the way, they're going to make it a multi-faith, a sort of a Chrislam type of structure. But they got to taking a look at how they would have to do it, and there are not even oak trees that stand 200 feet to where they can actually get the type of beams that they made Notre Dame with. There's like trees that are not even big enough to actually get that type of the length of that type of beam. So we can't even rebuild it back to what it was.
Right.
But yeah, well, what I'm wondering, Zen, is I can't do it. I don't have the education, and really, what I do is I'm basically a slave now. I got to worry about my farm and myself. But I'd like to see if you could do a book on this kind of grand unified theory that these Nephilim, these giants, were actually here all the way up until about 1744, and then, in other words, tie the whole thing together. Because whether you want to see a Taj Mahal in Chile, they're there. In Honduras, yeah. In India, of course. All over. You can see these incredible grand structures all over the place. Down in Argentina, Venezuela. You can go to Sydney, Australia, which they say people only got there, early 1900s, and it was only 1,000. Early 1800s, and it was only 1,000 Irish, British prisoners, and yet you see what they want to say these things were built in 10 years. Nothing but these grand, incredible structures, which they, that's what the convicts are going to do. First thing they do, they go to Australia, is build these incredible structures, and they call them churches. Something doesn't jive. But do you think that you might have, you'd be willing to do a book on, the Tartarian Empire and maybe rewrite history, Zen? Because your work, if it continues, this kind of information, and you can pull it together. You're a researcher. Are you thinking about that? What is your next book? What are you doing now? That go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm working on a movie script, and I wasn't going to say anything about this, but I've been contacted by some people that want to do something on Enoch, the antediluvian times, the Watchers, the fallen angels, and they've asked me to write basically a film script for it. And so that's what I'm currently working on. But yeah, I would consider at some point doing something on the the Tartarians. I have, like in my latest book, The Ancient Prophecies of Christ, which I just released last week, I speak about Tartaria in that book because there's something weird with the the timeline, the prophecy of Christ coming. It speaks about how he would enter into the flesh 5,500 years after Adam is cast from paradise. But in the general timeline of what we believe to be the biblical narrative, we have Adam going back 4,000 years from Christ, and then you have, basically Abraham coming in between there. You have, and then Christ was born at the year 0 or 3 BC, around that area, and then 2,000 years more of history. And so it seems like that his coming from Adam is said to be for, 4,000 years, and then the timeline of the Second World Age, we're 2,000 years after Christ. And so that should be equal to 6,000 years. And yet the prophecy that I've discovered within many different books speak about Christ coming 5,500 years after Adam is cast from paradise. And so that doesn't add up to the general timeline. And so I speak about that in that particular book, and I allude to Tartaria, to the lost history, and the missing time, and also this missing culture. But certainly it's not an entire book or anything. But yeah, I could consider something like that. It's just, finding the time. And then I don't claim to be any kind of expert on this particular topic or subject. And I know that there are other people that have done a great deal of research and study in this area. And so I don't know, maybe I'll partner up with somebody to do something.
Right. Well, there's a few good people. Let me just give them a bump, because they do really deep work. I mean, just like what you do with the serpent seed line and with the flat Earth, how you go into detail, the firmament. These people are like, I mean, I don't know how they find the time to do all what they do, but one is British flat Earth, Martin Lunking,
right, yeah,
or whatever. He did. I don't know where he's tapped into these Masonic databases and libraries somewhere. I don't know. People are feeding him stuff because he's got incredible pictures and maps and just writings. Absolutely unbelievable. Also, British flat Earth subs. That's another guy. He's an offshoot. Of course, Barnabas Nege, he does a lot of it. I've got anyways, there's an awful lot of them out there that do a lot of work. I wish I could remember everybody's name, but I can't. I just go through so much information. But the other thing, when you write this movie script, Zen, and this is the other thing that I noticed, this is like, I went through like 8 or 9 different disciplines, of evidence, architecture, maps, photographs, video, that type of thing. I went through all that. There's another thing that actually is popping up, and that is, it is looking like that the Atlanteans, a lot of people believe that when Atlantis fell, that they actually became like the Egyptians, and that was where the Egyptian, great empire came from. And then a lot of people believe that once the Egyptians fell, that they actually fled to, they became the Phoenicians, or maybe it was the Atlanteans became the Phoenicians, that became the Egyptians, that became the Tartarians. But anyways, this is my point. My point is, these Atlanteans that became Phoenicians or Egyptians, and then they became Phoenicians, and then they took up residence in what they call the city in Italy that's full of water, Zen. It's a
Venice.
Grand city. Huh?
Venice.
What is Venice? Right, Venice. In other words, then the black Venetian families, and then they actually pulled back. This one guy thinks that that group pulled back to the Swiss Alps, where they built these more grand structures, same type, fingerprints all over it, same type of people, and then ultimately it became the Grand Tartarian Empire. But there's things that stand out about them and their architecture, and that is the fashion and the dress. In fact, take a look at even ours. Look how we dress up in our capital, George Washington, with wreaths and halos and garments. It's like Roman type of silk clothing. And in all these murals you see, they all have a certain fashion and type looking. The other thing is that this evil giant race all seem to be white, which I guess will give fuel to the black Hebrews that white people are blue-eyed devils, we're a spawn of Satan or whatever. But anyways, they do seem to be all white. So, and white people are pretty violent, so maybe it could be very well that there might be some contact there to where those genetics are throughout that, but they do seem to be that. But they all have this type of Phoenician, Atlantean type of look and dress to them. With their statutes and their cherubims, and they're able to do marble all over. It's absolutely incredible. In fact, the Vatican now is shutting down. Did you hear just on the last day? They're shutting down the Sistine Chapel, and
what?
that's like
for what?
I think renovation. They're going to do something.
Really?
Yeah, but that's half of art history. So here it is. What little art history that we got, which this guy British, Flat Earth British or British Flat Earth, he goes through a lot of it, and he shows that these Phoenician, the Tartarian, he thinks they're Phoenician, Atlantean, Egyptian type people, in which they leave their images everywhere. They're always looking down on us like they're so wise and everything, smiling. He's very funny when he remarks on what they left behind, and he thinks that they took all their technology. Something happened, and like this great judgment came in 1744, and they took all that high-tech wireless technology, which Tesla, he seemed to have known something about. He tried to pull it back before they got rid of him, this wireless Tesla technology. But anyways, they pulled it back, and then what they did is once they were forced back into the earth through some kind of judgment where I think they were ruling us now, then they started burning up and tearing down all these structures, because if you actually take a look at what World War I and World War II did, and especially the fires, all of the grand fires, right around 1900, every city from Paris to London to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, they all had these quote-unquote grand fires. Even Seattle, there's like 25 square blocks of Seattle underground where there's a whole city right below Seattle. And what it was, that mud flood came, it covered this area. In fact, my wife works in one of these old buildings, and she says, yeah, there's something completely different about the nature of the building, the marble, the blocks, really high ceilings. And also the grand doors. You see, like even in St. Petersburg, when you see the great and mighty King Vladimir Putin of Russia, he comes to his assembly, it's like it would be like his capital. You see these two guys, dressed out in all these military clothing, and they reach up to grab. These guys are already 6 foot. They have to reach up to grab the doorknobs, the gold doorknobs, by the way, and the gold door. Very, very incredible, the Kremlin. And they open these grand doors, and they're like, these doors are 25 foot, every bit of 25 foot tall. But they're all over. But anyways, it's the fashion. So when you write that, Zen, I really do think that the fashion, because the fashion carries through all the way through the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Atlanteans, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, and then the Tartarians. And if you take a look at the artwork and the murals of all these different giants and among these little people, they're all looking like it's all one big toga party. They're all laying all out around with silk. It's a type of dress. You know what I'm talking about. So you may want to, if you write that movie script, you may want to give this people a heads up if you really want to catch the fashion. In fact, you can see Tartarian dress a lot closer if you take a look at like the Mongolians and the people, they're kind of up towards the Black Sea. You'll see it's a type of Nepal, Mongolian type of puff sleeves and always hats and stuff and reefs, that type of thing. Yeah, I just want to make mention of that, the fashion, the dress, also another fingerprint that goes back through that whole thing. But I don't know if we're coming up to a break or not.
Yeah, we are. We've got 3 minutes till break, but I wanted to ask you, you live in Washington, right?
Right. I live north of Seattle in the foothills, yeah.
Yeah, I
Cascades.
just seen a video about how Seattle has just been junked up as a city. But what's up with that?
Well, it's where it's like you was talking about, Zen, it's wherever these people go. Of the serpent seed line, doesn't matter if they're black, Jewish, white, Asian, does not matter. If they seem to have those genetics in them, wherever they go, they just destroy. They seem to just destroy things, and they're awfully greedy. So, I mean, you think about, we got things like Boeing and Microsoft here. I mean, Seattle's an international city. I mean, it's like a New York of the West Coast. It's a real city. It's like millions of people there, and they just the prices have gone way up. I mean, like, you know, believe it or not, my kid's property here, it's like they might have bought it for like a little over $250,000 or whatever. It's every bit of worth $500,000. Just the land itself, we could cut a little corner off of a lot and get $100,000 for it. So all that upward pressure, and because there's really a lot of people, a lot of the Chinese, really rich Asians know how to make money. I mean, they're really good at money. Anyways, they buy up whole apartment blocks, and so the prices go way up, and it forces people to start living out of their vans and cars.
In tents.
Like
a bunch of tent cities, and
then you got to be super educated. Now, fortunately, when I moved here, you know what I did with my children. I said, "This is what you're going to do." First off, none of them went to high school. I said, "You're going to jump right." I mean, I had like a 12-year-old going to college to get his GED. I just jumped them all. None of them. I said, "You're going to max out. You're going to do heavy math. You're going to do heavy English, and you're going to find the point to where your horsepower is not good enough, and that's when you're going to find out what you are. But you are going to fail. You're going to take the hardest stuff." And so eventually they did get really good education, but a lot of people don't get that sophisticated education to become like, you know, a wireless engineer or electrical engineer, that type of thing.
yeah.
So the
hold
jobs.
on, Jacker, we're almost
Okay,
up
yeah,
there.
yeah, okay.
All right, we'll be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I am your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio, and I am speaking with my guest and used to be often co-host, the Hijacker, about the Tartarian Empire and the forgotten, forbidden history connected to it as culture, and also the ancient maps, which show us things like California being an island all the way up through the middle of the 17th century, and then something happening which creating the Great Lakes, that it was thereafter that it became part of the continental United States. And so these are things that are not spoken about or revealed or shared in popular world history or American history that we learn of in school. But anyways, before we went to break, I had mentioned something that was a little bit off topic, and it is a documentary called Seattle is Dying. And it's basically talking about how the crime in Seattle has been pardoned, and there's been a homeless invasion of people that use drugs and that don't have to now be in fear of being locked up, and are able to commit crime after crime after crime and not worry about being detained for long term. That there are some people that have been locked up 60 times in the past couple of years there in Seattle, and they keep letting people out. And it's just a very sad situation. There's all these tent cities coming up all over and around the grounds, and people not being able to use public restrooms. They're defecating and urinating all over in front of businesses and elevators and things of that nature. It's just a sad situation because I went to Seattle, visited there, and it was a beautiful and really clean city. Smelled good. The landscape was beautiful. The Cascade Mountains towards the north, Mount Baker. Just really beautiful. The coastline and the ocean out towards the west, and all the evergreens, the Douglas firs. I mean, just beautiful. Mount Rainier to the east, and for that to be happening to that city, it just really saddens me. But from what I understand, this is happening all across the West Coast, United States of America, these sanctuary cities. And so one final comment on that, and let's go into the Tartarian stuff again.
Right, yeah. But before I do that, Zen, only because I can see not only did you go blow past Studio A, but you got a record-breaking number, so there's a lot of people that I've tuned in that you really, if you can give your contact information. Also, Revolution Radio, go to Revolution Radio, buy a seed pack or get the archives. I think it's $5 a month. Whatever you can do for the station to keep it going. And if you get the $5 a month archive, you can go back and get all of Zen. Zen does shows like this every week. You can go back and get all of that. And there's something like 80 hosts or whatever, so you can get a wealth of information. If nothing else, just get the seed pack that Nighthawk has. 35,000 seeds, 54 different herbs and vegetable varieties, all organic, heirloom, non-GMO. So anything you could do for the station. But why don't you go ahead and give your information out, Zen, now that we got such a huge audience, and let people know where you can get, like you just put your latest book. But anyways, why don't you get that? Because I don't want you to miss that. There's so many people, and I don't think that a lot of people maybe not, they're not familiar with you. That may be because I promoted you, and I promoted this interview for about a week on Deacon's show. So it's a different group of people.
Oh, right,
Go ahead.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. My books can be found at sacredwordpublishing.com. That is our publishing company, and this is my 21st book that I published, The Ancient Prophecies of Christ. And it covers in great detail, shows how Adam, Abraham, Moshe, all of the patriarchs, they knew about the coming of Christ as prophesied in the book of Enoch, with the mention of the elect one and also the Son of Man, specific to exactly what Daniel references Christ and his prophecies. And so I show how Adam was told, that Christ would come into the flesh, be born of a virgin of the tribe of Judah, exactly at a set time that he would fulfill the Levitical feast, and that all those prophecies, as specified in Isaiah and other Old Testament prophets, were fulfilled by Christ, and how that the Israelites also believed in the Son of God. Like so many people think that they only worship Yahweh as the Most High God, but it's not true. In fact, when you look at and examine the ancient manuscripts, it's clear that they worshiped the Trinity and that they revered the Father and the Son and also the Holy Spirit as the feminine aspect of the Godhead, and that what we see reflected in the Godhead is what we see reflected in the human family, especially with Adam and Eve and their children. It's the same thing, that they are a type and a shadow and a representation of what we see in the Godhead, with the Father, the Son, and the Christ being the only begotten, and that the Holy Spirit represents the motherly aspect of that portion, that male and female created He them, that both male and female, and the family is revered and sanctified by the Godhead, and all that is carried all throughout the scriptures, all throughout time, and passed down through the patriarchs. And so, this information being lost, I bring it forth and share it again to show people that Christ was the long-awaited Savior Messiah, and that He fulfilled the prophecies that were laid out, not only in the Old Testament, but all throughout even the extra biblical and extra canonical materials. And so you can find all of the other books that I've written as well, the many collections of ancient manuscripts that we've put together, like the collected works of Enoch, the Great Commission 1, 2, and 3. The third book being specific to the prophecies of the end time apocalypses. Another, the Yahushua Christ, the infancy, early childhood, and lost years, which is another amazing text, the medieval Irish Apocrypha. So many different books on prophecy, and just
Oh, and your three big sellers too, Deacon. I mean, not Deacon. Zen. Your three big sellers. Lucifer, Father Cain. That's a must book. Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We're Here. That's a must book. And the Firmament. Those are really big breakthrough books. So yeah, you got 20-some book. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I've got a trilogy on the flat Earth and biblical cosmology, and as Jacker mentioned, the Sons of God, Who We Are, While We're Here, and Skyfall, Angels of Destiny, speaking about and elaborating on pre-existence and election, and how it is that God knew us before the foundations of the world, before even the world was created, and how we were assigned specific role and mission to fulfill in this lifetime. And so all of those kind of topics, and then I think that the ones that people should start with to get a better understanding of the bigger picture, and how the war in heaven led to what is the enmity between the seed lines and our current contention with the New World Order elites, the Great Contest 1 and 2, the war in heaven and the enmity between the seed lines. I think that people should start with those two books if you're new to my work and you want to understand better what we are dealing with in our current situation, and how it ties into, again, the rebellion of the angels, the insurrection and war in heaven, and then also the beguilement of Eve, where the devil sired his own progeny here upon the earth, and that the elites are tied to the children of Cain. And, they're a bloodline and a family that are contending against the children of Adam, which I think all of these things are very important to understand if you want to make sense of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, it's a master key. Actually, you really can't even understand your Bible. What Zen's works did is so mind altering. It opens your mind to where you all of a sudden can understand something. It's like a master skeleton key. It just unlocks it. And I remember when I first real early on, a couple years ago, Zen opened up to the whole serpent seed line, because I couldn't figure my life out. I was so hellish. I was a political writer, always getting just could not understand how all this stuff worked all together. How? It's just me, and I walked around, cursed him. But then once he basically said, no, there's a whole nother world out there, another force. It was like my mind just was able to put it like this. It's like having a 500-piece puzzle, one of those giant puzzles. And I was able to put together a lot, but I just couldn't see the picture. I couldn't put the rest of the pieces together. But as soon as Zen opened my mind up, it goes, oh no, there's a serpent seed line. There's whole nother layer of reality that you don't understand, and it's right there in the Word of God. As soon as I got that, it was like I went manic. I just took the pieces of the puzzle, like it's like bam. I was like almost like a robot. Yeah, that's it. I figured that out. That's it. And I was able to bam, and I had the whole damn puzzle put together. And I went, wow, look at that. It was like my whole life then. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. It was a paradigm shift. But just to let everybody know, this is what Zen does. I know a lot of people don't read anymore or whatever, but this is the way he supports Zen. He's got a whole crew behind him, especially his daughter, Joy. She does yeoman work. In fact, I pretty much, because Zen's so busy, I pretty much got to go through her to, when I'm dealing with that ministry. But he's got a whole ministry, so you got to buy the books. You gotta support Zen, because this is what he does. This is how he makes his living. So I just want to let people know that. And that, like you said, that first and second contest, that's the big picture. That really will show people, as well as Lucifer, Father of Cain. Mm-hmm. And also I like Sons of God, Who We Are. That was my first book that I got from you. That really helped out. So anyway, that's at sacredwordpublishing.com. Right. So, and you can see he's got a whole crew there, 8 people. But anyways, listen, Zen, before I forget, I got a note here. When you do your manuscript, your movie script, and it's going to be about Enoch, right, and all that?
Enoch, the fallen angels, the Watchers, the antediluvian prior times. Yeah, the giant.
Here's a twist to it. And this made this movie a blockbuster. Do you remember the movie Constantine?
Mm-hmm.
Who was the actor? Neo.
Yeah.
He was in The Matrix.
Keanu Reeves, yeah.
Yeah, right. Keanu Reeves?
Keanu Reeves.
Right. So you remember in the movie Constantine, you ought to actually go back and look at it again. It's not going to taint your writing because of the unique information. But you know how in every movie there's always somebody that's got like a magical power or something that they can't see that somebody else can see, that type of thing, where the special effects. You ought to make it so that Enoch has this special ability to actually see another dimension that's overlaid in our dimension, so that unlike the people that maybe he's around in the movie, the normal people that he's talking to, he's got the capability of taking his eyes and rolling them up so only his whites show, and he's able to take a look at the spiritual dimension here on the earth. That would give us some pizzazz of a magical power, because he was a very unusual person. He probably did have that power, come to think of it. He actually dealt with the fallen ones himself, didn't he, Dick?
Right.
Zen.
Yeah.
He actually went up to the throne room of heaven. Quite a I don't know how they're going to be able to portray that. That's
that's pretty heavy. But with
heavy.
regard to, I don't want to, when people their eyes roll back in their heads, they're like being possessed, and that was not necessary for Enoch. He had that gift anyway. So.
Right. So, and the last thing about Seattle. So, what's happened, Zen, is that modern technology, finance, everything overwhelmed a group in the population who were not prepared for it. They weren't prepared for a world to become like all one, so to speak, all international, and the whole world coming together. and between the technology, the finances, Seattle being an international city, there's a large group of population that they lost their homes, they went into despair, the drug abuse, and you won't believe it, but if you go downtown Seattle, I'm talking about right along the interstates, right along the highways, in between. Imagine this. Imagine a major interstate, and there's a little sliver of land in between it, between the guardrails. Tent after tent, trash, just whole hillsides full of people, and it's just a complete, just dysfunctional. It's just really, and I'm hearing that there's actually a lot of cities now. It's just not Seattle or San Francisco, that there's actually a lot of cities that are actually falling in despair. So, yeah, these people, that's all I can say on that. But anyways, back to Tartaria, something a little. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just check my notes real quick to make sure that people got it. Oh, also we also see, so right before it appears, like you talked about the 1744 map. So you can take the maps, all the old maps, and you go all the way up into right around 1742. That's the last map, and you see California is actually separate. Now, some of the older maps will show that you go up into Baja California, up in the peninsula, right there, but they don't go any further. In other words, the map is not complete. But the next map, I forgot who did it. It's a 1744 map, or maybe it's a 1746. You see that California is actually a part of the United States. In fact, King Fernando is the Spanish king. He did a decree. So for people who don't understand this, think about it. It's early 1700s. We haven't even had our Revolutionary War yet. That's still 25, 30 years in the future. France is here. They've grabbed Louisiana, and of course we all know about the Louisiana Purchase. So the French moved in. They were grabbing that land, fighting the Indians and everything. Then the English, of course, 13 colonies and the Pilgrims. You got all that. But the Spanish king, that's when they were a world power. Actually, the Portuguese and the Spanish. Shortly after, believe it or not, the 1750s, that's when they completely drop off as a world power. And it could be because of this worldwide mud flood. But they had control of, the Spaniards had control of California. And so it was a big deal once California was connected to the mainland of what you would call America, North America, because the Spanish king actually did a decree. You can actually go and look in history. In 1747, he decreed, basically, look, you French think you got America, and you English, by the way, California is now a part of mainland America. We got our chunk. We're taking the West Coast. That's basically the reason why he did the decree that California was now a part of. But you can actually go and see that decree because he was basically saying, look, I lay claim to it now. Now that California is no longer an island, and if you actually take a look at the names, San Francisco, all the different Spanish missions and stuff like that. California's full of the Spanish imprint in its names and everything else.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Los Angeles. City
right.
of
Yeah. There.
Angeles,
Right.
so.
Yeah. And so but the maps worldwide, they change after that, and it's just not that California becomes part of the America. There's things that change all over, like you talked about the Great Lakes, but also there was huge lakes before that were like up in Utah or whatever that were all of a sudden drained. They were no longer there, and all kinds of things. For instance, you would think like the Panama Canal, that we dug that in the early 1900s.
Right.
Well, that was already in existence in these old maps.
On the map,
All
yeah.
we did was after the mud flood. All we did when we lost 6,000 people to digging out these Panama Canal through the fever with the mosquito. I can't think of it. Malaria, yeah, right. Right. All they did was actually dig the mud out. They didn't actually cut a canal. It was already there. They just dug out what was already there. In fact, you can take a look, all the canals all over the United States, on how quickly they were able to put these canals in. All they did was dig out existing canals that were already there. So, yeah, a whole history. And then the other thing, Zen, is that when we take a look at the secret societies, like the guy who wrote the dogmas. I hate to have so much information in my head. I can't think of these people's name. The guy with the dogma and magic, the Freemason guy, the bearded guy, the guy who wrote it.
Albert Pike?
Yeah, Albert Pike, right. So, Albert Pike, right, dogmas and something, right. So
Morals
that secret
and
society,
dogma.
right. And even before that, you see the Knights Templar, where that comes about, and the Knights of John, and other words, the Illuminati and the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits. If you take a look at all these secret societies, when do they start to come into manifestation? They come into right around the 13, 14, 1500s. It's almost like these ancient race of demonic giant Nephilim who are ruling the earth. They are now having children and setting up these bloodlines, but what they're also doing is establishing these secret societies in which people who they're giving them these type of genetics, and we've all seen it. I mean, you can see at will. Once you see people almost having shape-shifting qualities and elongated fingers and reptilian-type eyes, you got to take a look at some of these people who are ruling over us and are part of Hollywood and are the elite of the elite. Anyways, they set up these secret societies. So as you take a look in the timeline, Zen, they all seem to come about real close. Within a couple of hundred years, they spring up, and in our history. And so you would think, wow, that's something else. You know, why did they all metastasize all within like a couple hundred years? You know, the Rosicrucians and not that they didn't have them before, but they weren't as many. You know, the Illuminati and, of course, modern-day Council of 300 and all the rest. And so this was the Tartarians leaving behind not only their prodigy in a smaller form and turning gold and the cities over to them and telling them how to rule and this and that, as well as all the wars they seem to have among themselves, sort of like the Game of Thrones, something, even though these people are all part of the Canaanite serpent seed line, they seem to want to fight, use us as weapons and soldiers and try to take stuff from each other. They can't help it. But anyways, you see them, they get the societies in, they get the bloodlines in, and then whatever happens right around 1740, these people seem to take off, and they take their technology with them, and they come back, I guess, once in a while. It could be some of these, they got incredible UFOs. We all hear the stories of the hollow earth. Admiral Byrd, he actually went supposedly into the hollow earth and actually met them. He talks about these grand, again, Greco-Roman type structures, mag rail trains, saucers with anti-grav that actually took control of his plane, grand palaces. There was a father and a son. They took a little skiff.
God.
Wait, yeah, Smoky Gods, right. And they were in there a year, and these people were huge. You're talking 15-footers. They weren't your little 7-9 foot red-haired giants, which I think was an off-breed, who were actually more savage, because when you take a look at some of these old maps, yeah, you see all these grand cities and rural cities in the Tartarian Empire all around the West Coast, New Orleans, all up through Florida, and then it comes all the way up to New York, even up to Maine. But in the interior, all you see on these maps is land of the red-headed giants, and these people were pretty savage overall, and they're the smaller ones, the 9-10 footers versus the big ones overall. But yeah, it's all right there. Once you actually take a look, then you realize, wait a minute, why do we have such a lack of history until about just a few hundred years ago? And then we really start to get, people, the books. People want to say, well, it's the Guten printing press, and the Library of Alexander burnt down, so we lost all that information. When if you actually listen to Vatican insiders, these are scholars that actually been there. They've come out as whistleblowers. They said, one guy said, he worked in the Vatican for almost 30 years, 30, 40 years. It was a long time. He was an old guy. And he said he could go down into the tunnels in the Vatican. And he says there's 50 square miles of nothing but tunnels that were full of nothing but libraries and books. Just an incredible amount. And he says, I was there for over 30 years, and I don't even think that I actually walked or went to the whole extent of the network of the library underneath. And so if these people were ruling us, these giants, all the way up into the 1750s, and they did pull back, you can see they could easily pull because they got the money, they got the network. It's not like we got an internet or telephone or TV. You got to remember, these are peasants, like, these are slaves. They're like live outside the castle and grow like wheat, stuff like that, food, pigs. Their whole lifespan, they don't move more than 20 miles. That's it. They're lucky to even have a horse. So if they were to pull out the information and actually hide themselves from history, they could easily, as we can see now, even on the internet, everybody's getting, banned and wiped out, accounts wiped out. They could go and get these books and say anything about the giants, pull. This particular story, look, you're a monastery, you rewrite it and leave this out. Everything I went through and marked out, you get rid of. And so they can literally rewrite the history. So we probably don't even know our real true history. And so, in fact, some people then are saying that the whole Middle Ages, the whole 1,000-year dark ages, didn't even happen. And they want to say really that it's only been 1,000 years since Christ came. And I don't know if I believe that, but there's just a whole lot of history that's missing, a lot of books.
Right.
But anyways, what do you think, Zen? You think that we're on to a pretty good line of thinking? I mean, could it be that we had 20-foot tall giants, ruling to different cities all the way up until the 1750s? I mean, is that possible?
Absolutely. I mean, that seems to be what the ancient, as far as the archives and the bones and the legends and all of that seems to be what they are alluding to. Yeah.
The giant doors everywhere.
Right.
In fact,
exactly.
Right. And then when it comes to the mud flood, that's easily provable. Just go onto YouTube and take a look. These people will actually go into different cities in like Sydney, Australia, and they find these really old stone, incredibly complicated architectural Greco-Roman buildings. And you can see the windows, and you can see where, even in London, everything where they actually dig out and they go all the way down. You can see pictures in Rome where it's a whole city. They dig out this whole hillside, and there's a whole city of these really old type of art, Roman Greco type buildings, columns, marble, domes, towers on towers. It supports a whole modern city above it. It's it's everywhere too. Take a look at go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, no matter where you dig, the further you go down, the more modern and the higher the technology, the cityscape and as far as the buildings and the architecture, it the farther you go down, the deeper the layers, the more grand in design, which shows you that we're not evolving from the ancient past, but we're actually devolving, and that what was previous was of much grander and higher technology than what we see and even what we can replicate in this day and age. I mean, we cannot even create the cyclopean and megalithic structures that were constructed and put together in the ancient times. We can't do that kind of building process in this day and age. It's lost to us as far as technique.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's some video footage of Dresden, Germany. It's online. It's old footage. It's like back in the 1930s. And you take a look at that city. It is like they got a castle, which is almost like a Notre Dame on steroids. It is like all these giant doorways. I mean, it's just absolutely an incredible city that actually got just bombed in nothing. And so it does appear that they had, once they had to pull out, and I do think it was a divine judgment. I think the Lord just scared them out of their head. I think once it started raining and the mud flood started filling stuff up, I think they just went out of their mind. I think they just says, "Oh no, the old man's going to drown us again." And I think I think the Lord says, you better get back in your hole in the ground. You better go back in that hollow earth. You're causing too much havoc. But they did leave behind, there's all these different Illuminati, reptilian, human, hyper bloodlines, so to speak, of the serpent seed. That's for sure. And now they're trying to get their one world order like that. But what do you think on the theory, Zen, that really that the land actually was under the control of the Nephilim, and they had control of it for a long time, even all the way back to Atlantis, and then they became the Phoenicians, and then the Egyptians, and then finally maybe the Tartarians, but that it was is when Joshua and Abraham, and they came out, and Moses, they came out of the wilderness, and they started conquering these cities that were controlled by giants in that particular area. But what I'm saying is, what if the whole world was actually already under the control, and they had cities throughout, and that what Israel did was just open that particular, like the Holy Land up, where Joshua, he killed the 31 kings or whatever. I heard a program recently with you and Gary Wayne, which you guys, it's great that you're all going to hook up together. You may want to give that a bump, because you got this thing every Friday. I make sure I catch it, Zen. So why don't you give a bump to that, because that's a really good program on these type of topics.
Right. Yeah, Gary Wayne is joining Sacred Word Publishing and doing the Ask Me Anything shows that I do every other Friday with my daughter-in-law, Joy. And so he will be doing the same kind of thing with her. And it's going to be on Monday evenings. They're settling out the times and the dates. And once that gets resolved, then we'll be announcing and releasing. And also, we're even now taking questions for people that want to ask Gary Wayne a particular question about anything. And for those that don't know who he is, he's the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, which is a lot about even the information that we're talking about now. But I just recently did a 2-part series with Gary talking about the Jesuits and also the Rephaim Wars, which is connected in part to the Lost Book of King Aga Bashan. And for those that have never heard about or read that particular text, it's absolutely mind blowing and gives you insight into the whole flood of Noah's day and the reason for the flood, and also the how Noah's flood was really to target the giants that were born of the interdiction of the fallen angels, the sons of God, with the daughters of Cain. That they made this mutual pact to take wives of all which they chose, and then birthed into the world this unholy uh, race of giants, the men of renown, who, because of their massive appetite, they started to cannibalize even that of humanity, and to, in abomination, to eat human flesh and then to drink the blood, which is why when God reestablished covenant with Noah after the flood, he told them that they could eat flesh so long as it did not have the blood within it. And, of course, he would not allow blood drinking, but all of that was specific, a judgment against the giants for what they had done and what they were involved in previous to the flood. And this is also connected to the end of days, because as we were talking about, the giants live in the interior of the earth and they have been bound there for a certain time. But at the end of the age, as it speaks about in Joel chapter 2 and Isaiah chapter 13, and also the cave of treasures, which I bring all this information forth in my 19th book, Paradise, the Sides of the North and the Mount of the Congregation, where I talk about the release of the locust army at the end of days. But that it specifies that the giants and the locust army and other supernatural hybrid beings will be released from the interior and their bondage within the earth, so that they could take part in the wrath of God, and that they will be an instrument of his judgment against those not written into the books of life. And so at the end of days, these supernatural armies and the massive, pervasive destruction that they're going to bring here upon the earth will all be allowed when the restraining hand of the Holy Spirit is removed from the protection of this world. And the elites that are trying to conjure and invite into this world these dark entities, they're going to be allowed to succeed in their, the CERN and all of that, just as they did in the ancient times in Atlantis, that God's going to allow them to invite and to conjure up these demonic entities in the manner that they are wanting to. But what the elites don't realize is that the joke really is going to be on them, because the, allowing those forces into this world, they will destroy the elites and the others that are not counted in the books of life. And so what they are hoping to do to humanity, that the church in that day will be protected, and those forces will unleash hell upon them. And it speaks about how they will try to hide themselves in the interior of the earth in their deep underground bases. But I would add one other thing with regard to the Atlantean times. Christ said of this, of his second coming and the end of the age, that as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the second coming of the Son of Man. That fig tree generation, which we are, that unless the days be short, there should be no flesh left. And so he is coming to save us and to preserve us, because just as he did Noah and his righteous descendants, that unless they were saved and given a way to survive, the giants would have wiped them out and completely, made extinct humanity. And so, but as far as Atlantis, and you were talking about how the different cultures came about, it's my opinion that when God brought judgment upon the ancient ones, the fallen angels and the Anunnaki, the dragon-like entities, the feathered serpent people that were ruling as the pantheon of gods and goddesses in the ancient times, that they then, as it says in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, that they flew away from that destruction and watched the city and the temple being drowned and submerged and destroyed, and that Atlantis was utterly demolished, annihilated, and made a memory. And it says this in Ezekiel 26 and Isaiah 23 that God would make this of these people and of this culture, that only a memory of them would exist, but that no remnant, no nothing of their city or their ruins would be found, because they would be utterly swallowed by the earth and the oceans of the world. But it was after that time that they flew to different parts of the world, that consecutively you had the Egyptian cultures, the Japanese, the Indian, the South American, and also North America and other parts of the world like Stonehenge, Albion, um, and other areas, that they came up and were uh, the out jump gun on their evolution, and that they were uh, visited by the Atlantean, and that they took over and ruled in those areas and set up this hybrid priesthood, which is why you see depicted in the Egyptian hieroglyphs that there was this hybrid, part animal, part human, um, these gods and goddesses, and these reptilian dragon-like entities that ruled over them. And it was also why they, in worship and establishing rule over the peoples of these different parts of the world. And this is also why we see the Tartarian, the archaeology and the architecture all being similar, because they were all connected to the same culture, and they all were, tied to the destruction of Atlantis or
Yeah,
glory, whatever it is called, in the
yeah,
times. But
right.
they
Yeah,
all split off. There was a diaspora where the Atlanteans went to all the different parts of the world and established and aided and assisted those cultures in similarity. And that's why we see, a predominant theme of the same kind of construction, the same kind of architecture, the same kind of megalithic style being established and incorporated in all these various and widely dispersed parts of the world, which, you wouldn't think that unless they were connected in some way, that there would be that sense of familiarity in their culture, their civilization, and their architecture. And we do see that, yes, they were connected to the diaspora of the Atlanteans to all the different parts of the world after God brought judgment upon them. And that even the Mudfloods was another in the series of judgments and that he had brought upon them. And as you said, they were basically like, here we go again.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also, even the Tartarian flag, it's not quite a dragon or a lion. I don't know what the word.
Yeah.
What would you call that?
It's a griffin.
Griffin. That's it. That's it. Yeah, you know so much, Zen. Wow. But also the same thing you see in India, Japan, China, all about a serpentine type dragon religion. You see same pyramids, Quetzalcoatl there in South America, and it looks like it's like a worldwide religion, almost like in the movie Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a serpentine type dragon cult, and they never went away, folks, and they didn't stop eating people either, because they're finding now in Ireland and in London and in England and in France, they're finding whole wells full of nothing but the bones of young, small babies and children, to where they haven't stopped. You know, it's not like, oh well, you know, not like the royals. Oh, we stopped eating. They actually have a cookbook. We stopped eating little babies 100 years ago. We're reformed now. Oh, really?
Right.
Yeah. So we have all these disappearances, almost 1 million children a year. All the pedophilia. So that ancient old religion that like Zen said, promulgated by the Atlanteans, and then probably Egyptians, Phoenicians, and then Tartarians. It still's here. They set up secret societies, the whole network, and they still got that Luciferian, satanic coven religion with the witches and the warlocks, the whole thing. The world is not, and you can find, speaking of what Zen was talking about with Gary Wayne, which, by the way, that Gary Wayne's book is a real big, thick book. It's got a lot
pages,
of, a lot of references. I mean, I'd like to see you two team up to do like a really big book called the History of the Tartarian Empire. That'd be one hell of a book. But anyways, Genesis6conspiracy.com. And then Zen, you can also get a lot of his stuff on YouTube at fallenangels.tv, I think it is, and Zen Garcia, right, Zen? Right. Because I know we're coming to a close. And there's a lot
Endeavor
of people.
Freedom, yeah. Endeavor Freedom
that's right.
and
That's
Zen
right.
Garcia on YouTube, yes.
Yeah, on YouTube. And I get a lot of your information there. But, yeah, I mean, the world is nothing like, and how they could think, Zen, that they could trick us in that we're living on a ball spinning faster than the speed of sound and ripping through the... why do you think that they thought they could pull that off? Because early on, 300-400 years ago, they knew people were so ignorant that they thought they could come up with this model, and they weren't ready for, you know, men to be able to fly and to put balloons up 30 miles to see that the earth is, you know, razor sharp, flat, up to, you know, eye level. You think they got caught flat-footed, and they weren't thinking about it, that we would figure it out?
Yeah, I think, you know, it goes back to, well, supposedly the year 1666 and around that. You know, that's a really satanic number. And that being the Dark Ages or whatever, that it was during that time that Satan began to promote and to bring forth the whole concept of the heliocentric cosmology. And I think the reason he did so was, in fact, to plant and to establish the foundation for not only evolution and Darwinism, but also that the ancient aliens now, that they are our creators. And I believe that the whole basis for the heliocentric deception is so that he could establish the foundation that the Antichrist, the coming reign of the Antichrist, that the Antichrist is an extraterrestrial from way out there, and that they are millions of years in advance of us, and that, you know, they were the ones that seeded humanity and jumped the gun on evolution and created, you know, they're the missing link that evolution has been looking for so very long. And that whole theme, because people don't understand and have a love of the truth with regard to the Bible, that they are going to bend the knee to this fake alien God, and that they'll take the mark of the beast and accept him as their false savior Messiah. And much of the world, it says, the Bible says, even the most elect could be deceived if it were possible. And so that's what I see being played out and what is being pushed and what will happen, that this particular Antichrist, he will declare himself as God, and he will be indwelt by the spirit of Satan, the Antichrist, Apollyon, Abaddon, which means the destroyer, that he will come and preaching peace and unity and one world government and collective religion and peace to all people everywhere. But then he will begin to war against the saints and to target the Christians and those that believe and know Christ, Yeshua, as Savior Messiah. And so the Noahide laws, which we've been talking about with Yana and Stephen Ben-Nun, all that plays into the revelation, the beheading of the saints at the end of days. And he will use that as a basis for trying to exterminate the saints. And all that is coming. I do believe we're right at the door for, the revealing of the Antichrist. And we see now that Jerusalem has been declared the capital of the world, the third temple, the sacrifices, all that is being reinstituted. So.
Right, and I know we're getting ready to go, Zen. I appreciate you doing the show. In other words, let me on your show, and you can get all Zen's you get Zen's information at sacredwordpublishing.com, and you can find out all his contact. Joy does a real good thing of where he's going to be, events, or what he's doing. It's all right there, every place that you can go. But no, I appreciate this, Zen. I needed to get it off my chest. Because it does look like this is the true reality of the world that we're in.
Yeah.
And you're right. This great deception is the globe, is the spinning ball, is the ancient aliens. That's got to be it. And and I know we don't have any more time, but I have such
we'll do it
anger.
Again soon.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sounds good, Zen. All right.
God bless you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.